Hello, hello, and welcome to Hot Take Think Tank. I'm Kier.
And I'm Liam. This week we'll be discussing whether the dark triad is the root of social ills, how the US Census measures race, pharmacare in Canada, and of course the latest Kier here article about viewing healthcare as a privilege. But we wanted to start with a bit of follow-up and respond to a listener email that we got.
Yes, we got an email in regards to an exchange that we had last episode and a comment that you made, right, Liam?
Yes, it was something I said that prompted the email. It was in the Airbnb section last time around, and you had asked me, I said something about, maybe some places would benefit from Airbnb and other ones wouldn't, and you asked me to guess or speculate what places might benefit from Airbnb, and one of the things I said was like a small town that could benefit from tourism, but maybe doesn't have enough going on to attract a hotel. And we got an email about that speculation.
Yeah, and I remember at the time we were recording, I was tempted to push back because I do have some rural friends who are renters, and it's become somewhat common for local renters to get kicked out in the late spring so that the landlord can rent to tourists over the summertime. The email we received speaks to Airbnb's impact in rural communities. It says, I can personally name 3 people I know who have lost their housing in the last 2 years, right here in my community of less than 600 people, due to their landlord putting their place on Airbnb. Small places have a worse housing crisis than cities, not a better one, and tourism and short-term rentals exacerbate the problem. Talk to anyone in Tofino about this. That's why Tofino, Ucluelet, and Sechelt have all put moratoriums on new Airbnb listings and other controls on its spread in their area. And for people listening in that are far away from British Columbia, Canada, Tofino and Ucluelet are on Vancouver Island, and Sechelt is sort of north of the city of Vancouver, and all of them are much smaller places.
Totally. Yeah, and it's good feedback. I don't think I would have guessed. I wasn't clear about it, but I wouldn't have said anywhere in BC has enough housing that it would be a good thing for a small BC town. And I do also think, though, that I have a tendency to get very wrapped up in the big picture overall statistic kind of idea and totally forget about the individuals whose lives are affected by policies and companies like Airbnb. So the reminder that these policies actually result in people losing their housing is a good thing for me to keep in mind, I think. And feedback I'm happy to hear.
Yeah, for sure. And there are 16,000 whole houses in BC that are on short-term rental sites, which is a huge number, right? These aren't basement suites or laneway houses. They're whole homes that are only available for short-term rental. And there's actually some new provincial legislation that's come in to try and address the short-term rental stuff.
Totally. Just coincidentally, the week after we did our episode touching on Airbnb, our province announced a bunch of new regulation about short-term rentals. I think the gist of it is that it's trying to grant municipalities more ability to regulate Airbnb and sort of set new defaults for municipalities that haven't come up with regulations of their own yet. So it triples the daily fine that bylaws can charge from $1,000 to $3,000 per day. And there's also data sharing requirements that short-term rental platforms have to report to the municipalities how many short-term rentals there are, and they also need to operate actual businesses with business licenses that report to the city, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it seems all very positive and evidence-based, but there are actually some exemptions to the new legislation. Most communities under 10,000 people are going to be exempt, although those municipalities can opt in. So our email sender may still have to advocate to have it adopted in their community.
Yeah, totally. And I think I'm the more pro-business of the two of us, but I'm not to the degree where I have any problem with regulation coming in. It's when when a business isn't interfering with much more important priorities like getting people housing. I think that's like a perfect candidate for when the government should step in and sort of get in the way of a business messing with the market like that. So yeah, I think it's cool. I think it'll be interesting to see just how far it spreads. Yeah, and how many small municipalities opt in, because yeah, I don't think we're in an area particularly that Airbnb makes a ton of sense when you're trying to run a society.
Yeah, we do just have such low housing stock, and the problem used to be more concentrated in cities, but the pandemic really spread it out to every corner of the country. Is really struggling with affordable housing right now, for sure. Totally. So yeah, I'm really glad that our listener wrote in, and we really do welcome feedback on our episodes. This is clearly a conversational podcast, and part of that is that we're going to speculate. And if you have information for us, we're open to changing our minds. So please do write in.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's part of the idea of the show, is that you and I don't agree about a lot of these things. And the fun of it sort of is that we push each other in ways that we can't anticipate, right? And we try and sort of hone each other's ideas like that. So yeah, any listener who wants to participate in that part of the show is very welcome to.
Absolutely. So Liam, I keep hearing about this dark triad.
Yeah, isn't it a sinister sounding name?
It sounds very scary.
It does, but it's not out of a fantasy novel or something. It's from the first article we're going to discuss today. And it's was entitled "The Sociopaths Among Us and How to Avoid Them," published in The Atlantic and written by Arthur C. Brooks. It's an advice piece based around the concept of the dark triad, a type of person with a combination of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. The advice, perhaps unsurprisingly, is to avoid that kind of person. But don't worry, there are also light triads, who are people with a combination of faith in humanity, humanism, and, quote, a Kantian adherence to the idea of universal moral law. Those people are good. And the conclusion is that maybe if we all band together and support the light triads and dismiss the dark triads, we can make the world a better place. What do you think, Kier?
Well, first of all, I'd say I was really shocked to see this article in The Atlantic, because it's something that I might expect from maybe BuzzFeed or from a sort of a website that tries to look like it's Psychology Today, that type of thing.
Totally.
And I think there's also I can't help but feel like there's a little bit of a new age flavor in the whole light versus dark framing.
Yes.
So yeah, the fact that The Atlantic published this was really surprising, and I was actually a little bit skeptical to talk about it on the podcast, because I was is it even worth it? But you were really intrigued by it.
Oh, totally. I think I it's got to be the worst article we've discussed on the show so far. But I just think it's bad in a way that I find very intriguing. I don't know. Like you say, it's totally the sort of thing you'd see, I don't know, even on a magazine rack at a grocery store, something like that.
Oh,
where
yeah.
it's a really, sort of a catchy title about, you're going to be in trouble if you don't have this information. And then it touches on a lot of things, acting like it's they mention the word research a ton of times in this article, and it's not untrue, but it's a funny sort of way of looking at the world, and a very funny article of advice I found. I think my core thing that I found so strange about it was defined as these dark triads, right, which are people who first of all, just the us versus them framing of it, that there are these dark, evil people who live among us that can be identified and separated out. That seems wild on its face to me. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing I found about the whole concept of dark triads is that it doesn't seem that more clearly defined to me than just the idea of a jerk. You know what I mean? It's couched in all these you can measure it, and it can be observed and researched and correlated with things, but it's the advice, it felt to me, really just boiled down to like, you should avoid people who are bad and mean, and you should get close to people who are nice and sincere.
Right. Yeah. It feels like it's sort of, it's got a bit of an alarmist tone, right? Because it's like, oh, you might think these people are rare, but they're not.
Totally,
they make up
yeah.
7% of the
yeah,
population.
1 in 14 people.
Exactly. So, you know, and it's like, yeah, so, and there's this idea that like, oh, these people seem charming, you know, when you first get to know them, but then they trick you and they'll reveal their true selves later on.
Totally.
So, yeah, it definitely seems like a very kind of sinister way of talking about like, you discover someone is a jerk, what should you do, right?
Totally.
And I think one thing that's really funny is that they really did tone down the title, because I think the original title of the article was Beware Dark Triads and Their Toxic Personalities.
Ooh.
Right? Perfect
Very
for
good.
spooky season.
It is, yeah. That's a very Halloween-themed headline for the Atlantic to have.
Well, and it's funny, too, because it's saying, like, you know, 1 in 14 people are... or possess a dark triad. I'm not sure if you are a dark triad or you possess a dark triad. But anyways, apparently 50% of people polled qualify as a light triad. So that's way, way, way more common.
Yeah, that seems like just those two stats make me think that this article would have a positive spin to it, because that's like a pretty good ratio.
It really could, right?
But it's not so much presented that way. There were also a few parts where they like went on to describe dark triads in ways that made me feel bad for them, like men within the prison population are disproportionately dark triads, which is I was just grasping this whole article, wishing for like them to ever control for a confounding variable or anything like that.
Oh, tell me more.
Well, there's lots of other things that the men within the prison population are disproportionately, like they're disproportionately poor, disproportionately black, and there was no mention of like controlling for those variables at all, which I don't know. Do you ever see Parasite from 2019? Okay, I often go back to a line from that movie, which is about this poor family who they all get jobs working at this rich family's house, and they have this one exchange where one of the kids says that it's, you know, remarkable that these people that they're working for, they're rich, but they're also nice, and it's like, oh, a rich person who's nice, that's remarkable. But the dad sort of corrects them and says like, no, they're nice because they're rich. They have all this money to sort of splash around, so it's easy for them to be nice, whereas it's hard for us to be nice because we barely have enough as it is, right?
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
It just made me think, like, is the dark triad thing going the wrong way, where dark triad people are people who are down on their luck and need to put themselves first just to get by? Whereas light triad people who like have a pretty good station in life and get to care about Kantian objective moral rule instead of like, you know, getting the next meal on the table or something like that.
Right. Like, yeah, if you're desperate to, meet your basic needs, like, are you more likely to be manipulative? Are you more likely to be selfish,
totally.
right?
And is that even like a moral failing at that point to be selfish? Or is, right? It's like, I don't know, it gets down to the, like, can you steal a loaf of bread to feed your family or whatever? It's
right. Like, there's no mention of, like, there being any social or public failings in there, right? Or people being failed by...
Or anything other than, like, it's very, like, an individualistic look at this whole thing of some people being mean, right? That, like, it was never contextualized in how it... like, you know, the sociological viewpoint that like most things that arise in people come from their contexts. It was very much presented like I don't know, almost like a, what's the word for the like the reptilians or whatever? It almost had that vibe to it of like, you know, there's like a secret subset of society who are like inherently just they're evil. They're just evil people, you know? They're just evil. Which I think is a pretty bad way to look at the world and assess kind of anything.
Well, that's because you're a light triad.
I suppose so. Now, another funny thing about the article is how it consistently referred to the reader as not a dark triad.
Right.
Like, it consistently used, like, literally uses us and them to refer to light triads and dark triads, respectively. Which seems like an optimistic guess if it's 7% of the population.
That's true.
You'd think dark triads would be here reading it, right?
Well, I think there was one point where they're like, if you think this is you, get help.
Which is so funny because the whole thing is also discussing these as traits, which is sort of like a specific word in psychology that refers to like a stable and enduring attribute.
Interesting.
It's like being sad isn't a trait. It's like a passing, fleeting thing, right? Mm-hmm. But these traits, like narcissism, they're not generally thought of as things that can be like changed within oneself.
Yeah, definitely. Especially like in the popular imagination, because I do think I've read about there being some useful interventions. But yeah, you have some problems, like people with narcissism are very, very unlikely to ever seek out help.
Totally.
But even like, because we don't diagnose kids with psychopathy, for example. I'm trying to remember what it's called, but it's like callous and unempathetic behavior or something like that. Yeah. I might not be getting it totally right. But that's what future psychopaths get called as children. And there are like, basically, people with psychopathy, and this is from John Ronson's book, The Psychopath Test. They're much more motivated by positives than by negatives, so they don't really respond to punishment. But if they can be convinced that like their life is going to go better if they follow these, rules and social norms that they see around them, that they'll be happier and more successful, and they're going to make their lives a lot more difficult if they give in to impulses that they're having to act otherwise. That's something that can be kind of can make a difference for people, but that you don't ever hear about that, like when the public or social media is like discussing these conditions. It really is treated as like, this is what an evil person is, right?
Yes, very much so. And so I guess it's nice that this article throws away one line being like, seek help if you are worrying about whether you qualify. But that's it. It's 2 words of advice: seek and help. So hopefully that does the trick for people. But
well, and they did link to a quiz.
That's true.
And being the neurotic person that I am, I definitely took that quiz.
I took it also. So now we know. Well, it's not like it gets it thumbs up, thumbs down, dark triad quiz, but it gives you your scores on all 3 subcategories: Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy. Do I need to hang up the call? Are you a dark triad? Do I need to cut out of my life?
Well, I scored really low on psychopathy, so the scores are yay. All the scores are from 0 to 5, and I only got
0 to 5 would make more sense. These scores are actually from 1 to 5.
Oh, really? So 1 is the lowest you can get?
1 is full. Yeah, 1 is what traditionally would be called 0.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's a weird scale. Yeah, but that's what I found.
Well, that makes me feel even better about my 1.3 psychopathy scale. That's like barely any bit of psychopath.
It's
just a little sprinkle.
Barely any, but you're talking to someone without even a sprinkle. I got a 1. No psychopathy, not even a trace. So, I'm not necessarily better than you, but
you might be.
Take what you will from that information. My highest score was narcissism. I got a 2.8.
Well, I'm less of a narcissist than you. I only got 2.2.
Wow. I think those are both. I mean, I guess mine is past 2.5. So
You're like more
Wait.
of a narcissist than not a narcissist.
But I think you are too, because it's not 0 to 5, it's 1 to 5, so the midpoint is
Would
not
be
2.5. It would
It's
be
3, right?
Oh, right. Okay, so we're both in the clear then.
Phew.
Yeah, which is good considering how great I am. I'm glad the test can recognize that. I jotted down a couple like example questions. It was just like statements about oneself, and you had to choose like strongly disagree, neutral, agree, or strongly agree. And statements were things like, I hate being the center of attention, people who mess with me always regret it, and I am an average person. So
Yeah.
they managed to determine it all from I think there were 27 statements like that, and that's where the numbers come from.
When I thought that was so interesting. But first, I want to know who is more Machiavellian, and then I'll finish that thought. I got a 2.2.
I got 2.4.
Oh my gosh.
So I think that means my total score would be higher than yours, eh?
Let's see.
Just a scooch?
Yeah, I think mine's like 7, or wait.
Are you adding?
6.1?
A little bit of on the air math. I got a 6.6 overall, so
Wow, so I'm the good one.
so watch out. Yeah.
But no, I like that you brought up like the specific questions, because some of them seemed like really benign to me. Like, oh, I redid my math. I'm actually only a 5.8, so yes.
Oh, whoa. So I'm way worse.
Yeah, you're way worse. Anyways, but what was interesting is like there was a question that said most people are easy to manipulate, and that
yes,
one,
I noticed that too.
yeah, like that one to me has got to be about the Machiavellianism. And what's funny about that is that like I do think people are easy to manipulate, but it's also against my moral code to manipulate people. So I don't act on that, but I think that it is true, right?
No, I think I strongly agreed with that statement. I think it's like a good part of being self-aware to realize that you can be manipulated and other people can be manipulated. I feel like being blind to that would get you into some sticky situations. I think it's I don't know. That's a weird one.
I totally agree. Like that's what made me skeptical of this article, right? Is it's like if I can score as high as I did by agreeing that like people see me as a natural leader, like that doesn't actually speak to like how I treat people, how I handle a position of leadership, even if I take on positions of leadership, right? Like a lot of it, it's kind of like it feels more like thought policing, right? It's less about like the behaviors that you exhibit and more about like, I don't know, I guess how you see the world. And I was also surprised that I could score so high because I do feel very optimistic about the world. I do think most people are kind and like, you know, so it feels easy to score high.
Yes, I did not get the impression taking this test that it was measuring anything of meaning. I really didn't. I didn't get the feeling that there was much to this. A lot of it, I mean, I guess maybe the psychopath questions were a bit more clear. Like the people who mess with me will always regret it. That one seems a bit odd, but I guess I couldn't picture like a totally normal kind of person I'd want to be friends with getting like 100% on this test. But I don't think you need to get 100% to be a dark triad. So, interesting. Interesting / nonsense. I also got to call out just like, the use of just one last thing about this article. The way I love when people talk about research in a way where I'm like, there's no way that the research proves that. Like it says, not surprisingly, these personalities are ever present on social media, which research has shown to be a dark triad paradise.
I literally have that in my notes because I was like, that is a sentence.
What?
Social media is a dark triad presence and
paradise.
Research has shown that. Oh yeah,
research has shown it. It's like to show that sort of thing in research, you need like a functional definition of what a dark triad paradise is.
I feel like that sentence just like obliterates the whole article.
Yes.
Like if you feel confident saying that, then you've lost the plot, and like you cannot be trusted to
people
be
just
delivering that information.
I mean, I wonder if you got like a list of all the times the phrase research has shown, like articles with that in it, how often research actually shows that thing. It's a weird, I feel like people just love to put that at the start of, just before they say some wild claim that has nothing behind it. Just
I mean, research has shown that really makes people trust what you're saying a lot more than they would otherwise. So,
and it has shown that you are a little bit more of a psychopath than me.
Whatever. Overall, I'm a better person though. So
that's true.
I'm okay with that.
Unless you fudge the numbers to trick us all into thinking you are good, which is exactly what someone would do if they were bad.
True. It's so true. It's so true. Yeah, we cannot discount the fact that I could be evil for sure.
Very true.
Yeah. Okay, Liam, I have a question for you.
Okay.
What do you think the term octoroon means?
Well, I looked this up earlier when I read the same article as you.
Dang it!
Nice try, though. It means someone who is an eighth black.
Yeah.
Octo being the eighth. I'm not sure where rune comes from. Probably something offensive.
Yeah, it definitely could be. The next article we're going to discuss is called An American Puzzle, Fitting Race in a Box. And it was written by Jennifer Medina and published by the New York Times. And it's about the history of the U.S. Census. And I thought it was super, super interesting.
Totally.
So it gives us a history, and then it talks about like the kind of current issues that are being discussed about the census. So the first census was in 1790, and it has been done every 10 years since then. And the first census categorized people as either free white people, other free people, or slaves. And it did not count Native Americans at all. And every census since then has made changes to the racial and or ethnic categories you can choose from.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as much as 23andMe has tried to deny this fact, race and ethnicity are social constructs. There is no blood test that can categorize someone's race, and Medina says there's a murky history of law, politics, and culture around racial identity in America, and the census obviously the way it changes really affect that or reflect that over time.
Yeah, totally. I got the impression that around the time of the civil rights movement, it became very important to have your race or ethnicity represented because all of a sudden there were a bunch of laws that protected discrimination based on race, protected people from that. So in order to sort of prove that you had been wronged in that way, you needed an actual count of, what's the population rate, and then this company hires 100,000 people and has, a way disproportional racial makeup, then that might be against the law.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I feel like there's an interesting tension throughout the years where you have certain groups advocating to be included and counted distinctly, because that does allow health institutions, like all sorts of different government bodies, to look at whether there are things like educational disparities or health disparities and how to address those. But you have this opposite pole that's happening where people have also lobbied to be counted as white. There were a couple different examples of that. Mexican was listed as a race in 1930, but it was removed for the next census because Mexicans lobbied to be counted as white. And you'll also notice that Middle Eastern people and North African people, they also lobbied to be counted as white in the early 1900s because you would only have a pathway to American citizenship if you counted as white.
Right.
So,
And that lobbying it succeeded, and it's this round of changes that they're thinking of adding North Africa and Middle Eastern as a race, if I read it correctly.
Yes, exactly. That is one of the things on the table for the 2030 census, because we don't really have any numbers right now about whether there are health disparities or other kind of equity issues in those groups, because they have not been separated out.
Right. There was one fascinating stat, one of my maybe my favorite stat we've talked about on the show. It just says in 2020, quote, some other race, quote, was the second largest race group measured by the census. So, like, most white was the biggest group, second biggest group was some other race. And then all of the specific other races were smaller than that one. So the list they'd come up with, most people, or the plurality of people who were not white, didn't fit into one of the other categories by their own judgment, which is wild. Yeah. Seems like a bad list.
It's got to be a bad list, right? Because if the second largest group is miscellaneous, like, that really does not give us the information they need. And one of the main reasons for this is that when Hispanic people advocated to be added, for whatever reason, the Census Bureau at that time was like, oh, it'll be too difficult to add that as a race. So they added it as like a separate question, right? So there is a question about whether you identify as Hispanic, and Latino was later added to that.
Right.
And then the next question is about race, and Hispanic and Latino is not an option on there. So if you don't identify as white or black or Asian, then you're going to be checking the other box. And I thought there was actually a really funny quote from a senior demographer with the Pew Research Center in this article named Jeffrey S. Passel. And he said, the Census Bureau, ever since they added the Hispanic origin question to the census, has been grappling with how to get Hispanics to tick one of the conventional race categories.
You're right.
Isn't that kind of funny? They're like, why won't these people just pick black or white or Asian?
Right. Yeah, totally. They just can't figure out how to. Well, and it sounds like that's another one of the things they're proposing changing is moving Hispanic or Latino into the list of races as opposed to the separate ethnicity question. Yeah, which seems like, seems reasonable. But a group that is concerned about that is Afro-Latinos, because they're basically worried that Afro-Latino people will start only checking the Hispanic Latino box and not the Black and or African-American box. Yeah. But of course, you can check more than one. Like, there's no restriction on the number of boxes. Yeah. It's the other, I don't know, the thing that seems like it will lead to scary headlines in 2030 is that they think with the proposed changes, the number of people counted as white is likely to decline. Yes. Because adding Hispanic will move some people from white to Hispanic who have always been Hispanic, but just like you can see the headlines already, right? That there will be, the white population declining. Riles up some terrible people. Totally. And this could totally be fodder for that.
Yeah, I noticed the exact same thing. I was like, all right, everybody, like, be vigilant in 2030 for conspiracy theories about the great replacement happening.
Yes,
because
it will be an accounting change, not a population change, although obviously there's population changes too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I thought it was a pretty intriguing article, and it just really does speak to how race really is sort of like a socio-political concept that, like, shifts over time, and different groups with different interests push for changes. Totally. And you can even see, like, when there started to be anxiety around Chinese immigration, that's when Chinese was added.
Right. Yeah, because it was like people were worried that there were more Chinese people than they wanted there to be, so they counted them all.
Yeah.
Which is,
And it is such a double-edged sword, right? Because obviously it has been
Totally.
used for purposes like that. But, you know, if today we're using it to make sure that we can address different disparities, then, you know, arguably it's a good thing to kind of get as specific as we can. But there will
Totally.
never be like a perfect list of races either.
No. No, totally. I mean, it sort of feels like it's I thought it was interesting too, just how like the fact that this is part of the census, and like they gather all of this data leads to the headlines about like racial disparities, right? Which feels bad that those exist, but it feels good to know that they exist. And sort of without doing a proper counting of everything, that wouldn't change the situation. It would just change like society's ability to like make changes regarding it. So it's, I don't know. I just thought it was an interesting sort of like, I mean, not neutral, because like it goes over the different ways it was like politicized through the years, but like just these days it seems like trying to just earnestly measure things so as to improve the world, which is nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah, the whole like coming back to Octoroon, right? Like in 1890, that's when, you know, you had the categories of mulatto for someone who was half black, quadroon for someone who's a quarter black, octoroon, 1/8 black, and that really reflected the one drop rule of the time, right? That one drop of you know, African blood made you African. And that was something that was dropped in 1930 as like that way of thinking about race kind of wasn't so popular anymore.
Totally. And another thing that startled me a little bit was that I think it said that it was until 1970 that the census taker checked that box for you.
Yep.
So they just looked you up and down and put a mark on the box based on what you looked like, I guess.
Yep.
Which seems remarkable that they try to estimate whether you are a quarter or an eighth black by looking at you. That can't have been an accurate way to collect any information, but that's how they did it.
It's wild to think about that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Totally. And there's just a little mention right at the end about something that definitely came to my mind as I was reading the article, which is the census also collects information about gender. And it's currently male or female options. And obviously there's some people pushing to expand that list.
I can't imagine it will only be male and female by 2030. I think that'll change.
Yeah, I might depend on who wins the next couple of elections, I guess.
That's true. One other recent proposal is adding American descendant of slavery as like a checkbox, because that could be potentially used in reparations. And that's a really interesting idea, just because, like, you know, the very first census in 1790, it didn't even categorize people as black. It categorized them as slaves, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's really interesting to me, you know, kind of coming, like, do people want to identify with that again?
Totally. Well, and like you can't make the assumption that everyone who checks black is a descendant of a slave, right?
Exactly.
So it would be meaningful in a way that's like not captured by the current set of questions. I wonder about there being a separate question for that instead of intermingling it with the race question, but it would be interesting to know for sure.
Yeah, they're certainly trying to shove a lot of information into this one question.
I mean, it's sort of a wild project, isn't it? Trying to measure, 300 million people or whatever, and get meaningful statistics about them all.
Yeah, no, it's wild, you know? Like, on the one hand, you're like, why do we even do this? Like, it's insane, like, to try and, you know, because that's the thing, like, over time, not even over a long span of time, like, borders are always changing. You always have, like, minority ethnic groups in countries.
Totally.
Like, there's so much fluidity. Things change over time. Some people want to assimilate. Some people want to kind of stay within their diaspora. So Yeah,
Totally.
but yeah, we can't. It does seem that like dropping that question altogether could certainly only um, worsen disparities, or at least make them
Right.
invisible. And so then who even knows if they would get better or
Yeah,
worse, because we wouldn't be tracking it
totally.
anymore.
No, that's something I feel like you read that news about. I've been reading it about China's government recently, where the economy is not going so well in several ways. And they've decided to just stop publishing a bunch of the numbers that are going in the wrong direction.
There you go.
So now no one knows anymore what youth unemployment is because they stopped measuring it. It's just, I guess, one way to short-term make your problem go away. But the real question, Kier, is should they add the dark triad questions to the census? Get like a real good population level dark triad measurement.
Oh my gosh.
And
Can you imagine?
And should it be a protected class, or is it okay to discriminate against dark triads?
I think you'd have a really hard time being like an activist for the rights of dark triad people, you know? Like,
I don't know though, but they have their ways of getting into high places in government and all that.
that's true. Maybe they're powerful enough. I mean, I think if they could get some like really sort of compassionate spokespeople who could like, you know, kind of make up for the deficits that they
Yes,
they
yep,
have.
that they're evil. Yeah, that would be great. All right, so let's get to the next article. The third article we wanted to discuss is about filling a hole in Canada's universal healthcare coverage. It's an article from the Tyee called "Pharmacare's Big Moment is Here. The Deciding Factor is Political Will." And it was written by Nav Prasad and Stephen Morgan. The coalition government in Ottawa is trying to make pharmacare happen. The official recommendation was for them to implement a universal public program covering essential medicines, but the details about funding, splitting the bill between levels of government, and national procurement are unsettled at this point. And the industry is lobbying for a much watered-down fill-the-gaps approach, which would give basic coverage to currently uninsured Canadians, but leave private insurance plans untouched for everybody else. So, what do you think about this one, Kier?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad it's getting covered because I feel like it's interesting what gets Canadians riled up and what doesn't, you know,
Yeah.
because this is a really huge deal, right? Like, the idea is basically that the government would buy in bulk a number of common medications, right? And then they would be able to, like, yeah, negotiate for really good prices and save money both for the government and for the people who end up needing the medication, right? And a lot of other countries that have public health care systems already do this, right? Like the United Kingdom, for example. I think actually over there, like there's just like you pay the same price regardless of what medication you're picking up.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So, yeah, so
Yeah,
they've got
I checked in.
thing.
I checked into sort of how Canada ranks, and it turns out we, within the OECD, which is like I can't remember, about 30 countries, all pretty, like generally rich countries, and Canada spends, per capita, we are third highest spenders on pharmaceuticals, after only the United States and Switzerland. So all the other developed nations, other than those two, spend less on their drugs than we spend on ours, which that seems like that's not a list you want to be at the top of, is it?
No, it's not. And I think like drug prices get treated as if they're objective somehow, like that's just how much that drug costs, but that's not true at all, right? Like there are many countries that already do this bulk buying, and like if the entire government of Canada is like, we're not going to pay that much for insulin, the drug companies will lower the prices, and they have lowered the prices for other countries, right? So
I mean, it's like they won't lower them below like manufacturing costs or whatever, but I think it's like 90% there's some number about that, achieving prices that are as much as 90% lower than Canadians pay today.
Yeah.
So there's about 90% headroom, it appears.
Isn't that a wild number?
That is a wild number. Yeah, and I actually don't have like I'm one of the people who goes to the pharmacy and pays full price for all of my medicines. So this would be great. I'd appreciate this. Yeah, I felt like this article was so pro pharmacare, and I think both you and I are both very pro pharmacare. But I felt like I had to at least look up the other side of the argument, just for posterity's sake. And I found like a think tank, like a conservative think tank's arguments against pharmacare, and I thought I'd just read them, see what you think, if you're convinced.
You have to.
Okay, first they say that the true tax burden should be calculated and transparently presented. Because if the government's paying for it, that is the citizens paying for it through taxes.
Sure.
Which seems true, but the argument is that bulk pricing would bring the costs down, so on average people would pay less money,
and the government would pay
taxes.
less money. Everybody would pay less money.
Okay, they're also worried that drug shortages may result.
Yeah, well, the article says the exact opposite, actually, because the government, in bulk buying, would be able to put aside stockpiles for future shortages. Right. So we would be more immune to shortages.
Yeah, and it would also be able to, like, negotiate specific, like, ongoing contracts, right? Like, that this company needs to deliver to us this many pills, this, every month or whatever. Right, so those companies would have to comply with existing contracts that would be harder for big companies to negotiate than an entire government.
Exactly.
So that one wasn't super convincing. Okay, this one is the funny one. There is also substantial evidence indicating that lower revenues and profits will reduce pharmaceutical R&D spending. So are you worried about the lowered profits for the pharmaceutical companies?
I mean, I'm not concerned about that. I do think that like public funding for all sorts of research and development, pharmaceutical and otherwise, is not high enough. And I think actually, like, we are very vulnerable when we leave it up to pharmaceutical companies what should be researched and what should not, because they will never research medication that is not going to make them a significant profit, even if we really need that medication to be developed. So I don't think we have a good method right now at, like, the way that we've sort of distributed who does research and development. I'm not a big fan of it. So if that shifts, I won't be too sad.
No, it seems like a weird way to fund like public health research is through letting pharmaceutical companies charge high margins on essential medicine and funneling that money. There's got to be other ways. There's got to be other ways. And not to be a selfish Canadian, but there's also a different country that provides lots and lots of profits for pharmaceutical companies and basically funds all the research for the whole world. So I don't think Canada's an essential part of that chain as it stands. And then finally, it is essential to acknowledge, I'm reading a quote here, the potential for worsening health outcomes and suboptimal therapeutic substitution. And I think what they're getting at there is that if someone, like, is used to a certain brand name of a medicine under the existing system, they might need to switch to, like, the generic version under the replacement system, and that could be suboptimal. For sure.
Yeah, that could be suboptimal. But I still would prefer some people get free medication than nobody gets free medication. I don't see how that's like an argument against,
I think
the system at large.
I think that it's that's like an argument specifically against the, like, universality of it, like the idea that, like, will the other medicine even be available anymore if this program comes into place, or will, like, all privately purchased medicines kind of be off the shelves.
I mean, I think that's ridiculous, but I do, like, you know, the proposal right now is for like 100 medications to be covered by pharmacare, right? So there are tons of medications that will not be touched by this first, you know, act.
Totally.
But yeah, the idea that suddenly those companies will decide not to send, like, to let companies in Canada buy other medications, like, I don't, that,
and even if they did, I feel like it still might be a net win with like a slightly, maybe that's me forgetting about the individuals again, but it feels like a few people needing to change their medicine, even if it's suboptimal for their health. If it net is better for the whole country's health, that might be a cost worth paying.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, like, there's also just a lot of misunderstanding. Like, a lot of people think that, like, there's a huge difference between generic and brand name medication,
yes, totally.
and they insist on the brand name. And I will say that, yeah, some people do have allergies to, like, certain fillers, so there are times when someone can't make a switch, but, like, almost always you can, unless you have, like, very, very specific and rare allergies, right? So that is, like, you know, kind of like a false issue in most cases. And the other thing I just have to say, like, we're hearing all these conservative arguments and the idea that, like, oh, that, you know, there'll be lower quality pharmaceuticals if we do the substitutions. I just want to remind everyone that back in 2012, when the Conservatives were in charge of Canada, the federal government cut off access for refugees to medication and treatment for chronic diseases including hypertension, angina, diabetes, high cholesterol, and lung disease. And this was later found to be cruel and unusual by the federal court, and the Trudeau government reinstated those treatments. So I just feel very cynical about the idea that conservatives, or at least the Canadian Conservative Party, are looking out for people's health, because when they were in power, they took a number of different steps to make it more difficult for people to get the care they needed, and specifically targeted refugees. So,
that's a bad look. That is a bad look.
That's part of their track record. Let's never forget it.
Totally. Well, it's like, I feel like this exact list of problems is the same list that, like, free market people bring up around any state enterprise. Like, it's the exact same arguments that they have in the States about not having, like, universal health care at all. Right. They're like, oh, it'll hurt innovation among the companies, and we don't want to force citizens to choose, take away their choice for which treatment they get, that sort of thing. It's like it seems pretty playbook, and I don't think either of us think those arguments hold much water in healthcare in particular.
No, I don't find them very convincing. And I do think it's fair to be real about the fact that there are trade-offs, right?
Totally.
Like, the fact that we have a public healthcare system that more or less, depending on the province, does not allow for private clinics, like, the downside is that you can't pay to skip the line.
Totally.
Right? And people who have the money to skip the line would like to be able to do that. Right?
Yeah.
But
totally.
Generally, most provinces have decided that does not outweigh, like, that's not more important than everyone getting treatment, right?
Totally.
Like,
well, and I think that the system they try to set up is that you get to skip the line if you are in need of urgent health care, which I think is a reasonable way to get people to skip lines.
Right.
There are situations where people need treatment, before other people, but trusting, like, their spending power to determine who needs healthcare soonest.
Exactly.
It seems like silliness, yeah.
Exactly, right? Like, we could, in a private system, we can organize who gets in first by how much money they have. In a public system, it's how sick you are.
Totally.
Right?
Well, if everyone was rich, I feel like those might correlate pretty well, because if everyone has money to splash around on healthcare, then people who are sicker would splash around more. But that's so far from reality that it's not even worth considering, really.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so far from where we are. So I think it's very hard to like make a good argument about keeping people from getting the medication they need. And that even got brought up in the article, right? That
Mm-hmm.
like there are overall healthcare savings from doing this. And
Yeah.
I've got to imagine that part of that is that, you know, if people are not able to afford preventative or kind of management
Mm-hmm.
medication, then their conditions will deteriorate and they will be
Yeah.
even sicker and need more intensive treatments, right? So
Totally.
there are just so many arguments for it. And you know, even like individuals just will never have the power to negotiate drug prices, and
Totally.
companies within a country have a lot less sway than an entire country does, right? So
Totally. Well, and it's also reasonably sort of an industry that deals with a lot of regulatory capture, meaning like it's not easy for like a small new startup to compete with the pharmaceutical companies because there is a ton of reasonable regulation around who gets to sell pharmaceuticals. Right? You can't be like, oh, I could beat them on price. I'm going to set up a Tylenol shop in my garage. There's not room for competition like that in the pharmaceutical market. So
right.
it's not going to be like the people acting as if it's like the free market needs to be the solution here. I feel like aren't being earnest with the situation, which is it's not the kind of market that anyone actually thinks should be totally free, and that anyone can sell any bottle of pills that says anything on the outside. Like it's a heavily regulated thing, which is where the government is important, I guess by definition.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think, yeah, if people knew what a sort of free for all, regulation free healthcare system really results in, they would probably change their mind about it pretty quickly.
Totally. Well, and it's also disingenuous. Like the companies that are making all the money with this system, how it is, also don't actually want that. They like the situation as it is, where there's just enough regulation to keep any honest price competition from bringing prices down, but not so much regulation that they don't get to charge whatever they want.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's good to remember that, like, all the way back to 1947, when the Saskatchewan government introduces the first provincial hospital insurance program in Canada, like, there was huge opposition. The Canadian Medical Association completely opposed publicly funded healthcare. You know, so it's more of the same. Like we've always had these arguments against public health care ever since it started.
Totally.
That, you know, that treatment would get worse, that doctors wouldn't work anymore because they wouldn't get paid enough, and so on and so forth. Like it is the same playbook. It's very familiar, and yet, like, Canada's healthcare system is like the envy of a lot of other places. You know, even
Totally.
with the issues that it has, like, I would way rather be here than many other places.
Totally. Well, and there's no political party in Canada that's like, we should get rid of universal health care. Like, it's a settled issue. That was the correct move, at least for the federal parties and everyone here in BC. Maybe in Alberta you'd find some people who don't like it, but
well, yeah,
pretty widely regarded well.
Yeah, there definitely are like private surgical clinics in Alberta, and so yeah, there are some exceptions, and the Conservatives are always trying to chip away at like the corners of the public healthcare system.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's something that you kind of never get to fully put your guard down about, but yeah, they're definitely like kind of reduced to making arguments about like particular pieces of it rather than like attacking the whole thing.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Well, speaking of healthcare.
And Americans.
Yeah, my latest essay was Dear Americans, Healthcare is not a privilege. Wellness gurus will not save you. And I released that last Friday.
Yeah, it's an interesting article. I love in like right near the top, you provide a whole list of things you have tried to help with your chronic illness. And it is one of the wildest paragraphs I've read in a long time. I almost want to read it here on the podcast, just in case anyone hasn't read the article. But do we have the time?
I think we got the time. It won't take that long.
You want to read it, or should I?
I'll go for it. Yeah, so I start the article by talking about when I first got sick with what would eventually turn out to be a neurological condition. I was really suspicious of the mainstream healthcare establishment because I felt really let down by it. And so because I felt failed by that, I went searching elsewhere. And here's the paragraph from the essay. Before long, I wound up in the vortex of the online chronic illness world. I decided to forego all pharmaceutical treatments and use turmeric pills and marijuana to manage my symptoms. In addition, I tried cutting out sugar, gluten, alcohol, and caffeine, acupuncture, chiropractic, osteopathy, naturopathy, somatic therapy, cranial sacral therapy, neuroplastic rewiring, self-directed exposure therapy, visualizations, positive thinking, yoga, Pilates, walking, jogging, dancing, swimming, self-induced neuromuscular tremors, intramuscular stimulation, trigger point injections, electrode stimulation, eating ancient grains, dark greens, berries and fish, drinking iron, protein, herbal teas, Gatorade, cinnamon water, kombucha, and more water, meditation, body talk, breath work, energy work, arnica salve, peppermint oil, devil's club cream, several tinctures and Bach flower remedies, a variety of supplements, homeopathic pills, probiotics, fiber, spinal traction, neck traction, foam rollers, resistance bands, weighted blankets, weighted eye masks, eye drops, and tinted glasses.
That's it? That's all you tried? It's an amazing list. I've known you obviously throughout all of that, and it was funny because I remember many of those, and I also do remember a couple that you didn't include.
Oh, really?
It's a while. Yeah, you tried so much over the years. It's remarkable. It's a remarkable list. You've really thrown the kitchen sink at this thing.
I really have, and it does sound insane, but I think it's really common as well because if you are in unrelenting pain, you will try anything to get out of it.
Totally.
And I guess I just there was a time where I really thought of Western medicine very, very poorly, and I kind of held up on a pedestal alternative medicine, right?
Yeah.
But over time, I realized that the wellness world really positions itself as altruistic, right? They're actually looking out for you. The doctors aren't. The doctors are looking out for their own profit, but not us over here, right?
Yeah.
And that's just very silly because they are also selling products. They also depend on you not being well to need their products, right?
Yeah. The difference is not one person's charging you money and the other person is not. Particularly here where we have free health care and the doctors are not charging you money.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and that's what I kind of get to in the article is when I do talk about health grifters or that type of thing on social media, I get some messages from people who are kind of saying, well, it's better than nothing, right?
Yeah.
And I continue to find that shocking, right? The idea that a useless treatment is better than nothing. And so far, everyone who sent me a message like that has been an American. And that's why I started my essay, or I addressed my essay to Americans. Because I really feel you're really kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel if you are defending sugar pills, right?
Totally. Yeah, no, it's sort of a wild, better than nothing is not the standard you should hold your healthcare to. That's literally the lowest bar. I don't know. I do have my own thoughts on placebo treatments, and I generally think of them as being pretty dangerous.
Oh, that's interesting.
There is there's cases like yours where it's a condition that doesn't have very much research around it, and there's sort of not an established mainline treatment. But I don't think generally these placebo, snake oil kind of things are that targeted. I think they're usually put forward by people who are like dismissive of all Western medicine and of all doctors and hospitals, and I don't think they are very targeted. And I think they can land on people who, maybe it starts that they do just have a bit of chronic pain, and they get swept up, they start following Instagram accounts or whatever it might be. But then maybe they reach a point in their life where something more serious comes along that does have a treatment, but they have become so ingrained in this way of thinking about the world that they don't seek out the actual treatment. And a lot of diseases can get bad really quickly, and sort of getting to them early is key. If you spend 6 months trying to treat your breast cancer with tinctures or whatever, that might kill you.
Yeah.
So it's
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a really good point, is it's like, it's one thing to turn to placebo, when you're dealing with something that's not going to kill you. But yeah, absolutely. Like taking that same mindset where you're paranoid about the mainstream healthcare system, you think that they profit off of keeping you sick, you're going to do everything you can to avoid them. That is incredibly dangerous if you have a life limiting illness, right?
Totally. Yeah, and it might do no damage to you for 30 years straight, right? But then at the end of those 30 years, it could be very bad to have been thinking that way for that long.
Yeah, absolutely. And people do try and cure cancer through meditation or through drinking lemon water or whatever, and people die because of that. So it does get really serious. But I think something that really kind of underlies all of this is that I've also noticed that Americans will often refer to healthcare as a privilege. And that's something I really take issue with in the essay, because framing something that is actually a human right, a recognized human right, as a privilege really makes it sound like something that like some people are going to have and some people are not going to have. And, maybe we can make the group that has it a little bigger, or maybe you can join the group that has it, rather than just being like, no, like there's no such thing as deserving health care, right? It's impossible not to deserve it. And I really would love to see, like, every time it pops up that healthcare is a privilege, someone stands up and says, no, it's a right. Everyone has a right to healthcare. And I think that we would see less suspicion and less paranoia and less fear, because I think so much of that is built on like the horrible experiences that people have with the healthcare system in America, and the way that it is motivated by profit, right? Like it's not just in people's imaginations that like their well-being is not the top priority. But I think the answer to that is not gurus, and it never will be, right?
Right. Totally. The answer to that, I think you're getting at, would be like the government acknowledging it as a right and doing its darndest to provide it to everyone. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And there was actually a great comment from Reading Rainbow. Love that show. Miss it. Who says, the division is the point, as it is with all discussions of privilege in a social justice context. Framing things in terms of privilege also implies that the privilege could be taken away. It suggests an authoritarian parent-child relationship. And then it goes on to say, white privilege is being treated like a citizen with rights. This isn't a privilege, it's a right. By framing it in terms of white privilege to be dismantled instead of rights to be gained for minorities, you are priming for a solution that involves removing rights and freedoms rather than gaining them for society as a whole. Everyone loses. You better behave, or mommy will take away your cell phone privilege.
Yeah, totally. I had a similar thought to that last bit, reading about because you do mention how privilege is like acknowledged on social media, and how you used to value and engage in such empty gestures.
Mm-hmm.
It did make me think like that, like what is sort of the right impulse when you feel privileged? Like because I feel like the current standard is that you're supposed to acknowledge your privilege, which I kind of agree with you seems to be an empty gesture. And maybe it's like when you feel privileged, the right move is to look if there's any way you can expand how far that privilege reaches. Like how can you make everyone have that same privilege that you currently have, so that it's like not a privilege anymore, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think like this framing can get really tricky. And there was an example that happened in Victoria, BC, where they studied it and found that Indigenous students were a lot less likely to be in the music programs at the public schools. And so the school board decided to cancel the music programs for equity.
Wow, right. That they can't have any programs that aren't equal, so we'll cancel the ones that aren't equal.
And there's definitely
wild.
There's no way to like encourage Indigenous students to join the music program or to make it more appealing or welcoming. No, the way that we can provide equity is by just getting rid of it and nobody gets music. And that is exactly what I feel like that commenter was describing, right? Like that's, and that just is such a bizarre way of responding to privilege, right?
Yeah. It makes me think of something from like business school or whatever, which I did not attend, but I've read things related to, which is when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure.
That's interesting.
And that's a thing I think of often, right? Where that seems like an example of that happening, where it's like, we want to measure to find disparities in these various programs, right? Because we want to bring them down. And measuring it makes sense, and wanting it to be brought down makes sense. But as soon as you lose track of like why, and you start focusing just on like how can we get this number to go down, you start making bad decisions that don't like don't actually help you pursue the thing you thought that this metric would help with.
I couldn't agree more, right? Like that's the thing about the gradual like neoliberalization of our public institutions over the last several decades, is that like rather than acknowledging that, you know, running a disability agency or like a poverty program is serving a particular purpose, we decide that every single institution, every single government office needs to be meeting very specific targets, right? And that
Totally.
they need to be improving on all of these different metrics. And like, how carefully are those metrics chosen, right? Like, is it like, oh, how many appointments can you squeeze into a day, right? Or like, I remember like being in a program where she was like, oh, well, we need to like close your file basically because we have to finish every file within this many months. And so even if you don't leave with the services you were supposed to get, it's actually more important to that office that the file gets closed on time.
Totally. Yeah, well, and that's why it's such an important thing, like for people who run businesses, right, is that they don't have the capacity to like direct every, you know, if it's like 1,000 people who work at the company, you sort of do need ways to like aggregate how is it going overall, right? But if you become too hung up on those numbers, then people will start cutting corners to meet the number without actually doing the thing that the number was supposed to represent.
Yeah,
right? That like,
exactly.
Oh, we're supposed to close the files within 3 months. That means we're supposed to fully perform the service within 3 months. But if you're just measuring how quickly the files get closed,
let's just cut some services.
Yeah, let's just do less. Let's just close the file even though it's not really done, right? You totally can lose the plot when you get too hung up on any sort of measure, whether it be race or dark triad or whatever. Well
said, Liam. Well said.
Well, should we move to the quiz?
Let's do it. I'm ready.
Okay, cool. It's a quiz not super related to what we talked to today, other than that it has to do with something that's very complicated and hard to measure.
Oh, good.
I've got a question, and I've got one hint.
Okay.
And the question is, what was Canada's overall poverty rate in 2021? That's the last year that data have been published for.
Okay.
And if you'd like the hint, I will tell you the rate in 2015 was 14.5%.
Okay. I'm gonna guess that the overall poverty rate was 9%.
The answer is 7.4%.
Wow. You know what's funny about that is I was actually gonna guess lower until I heard you say 14. And then I bumped it up because I was like, how could it change so quickly in such a short amount of time?
Yeah, totally. That's sort of why I wanted to give the hint, actually, was to like let you peg your answer to like a known entity instead of sort of a shot in the dark. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the government has like legislatively committed to trying to reduce the poverty rate by half between 2015 and 2030. Mm-hmm. And they're pretty much already there. From 14.5 to 7.4 is the progress so far.
That's amazing.
I thought that was great. There's like a whole bunch of programs that have been brought in, like the Canada Child Benefit, Canada Workers Benefit, increased old age security, and yeah, the numbers are kind of startling. The one that struck me the most probably is 653,000 fewer children are in poverty now as compared to 2015. So yeah. I just heard someone, I read an article that like went over Justin Trudeau's track record so far, because he's not doing so hot in like the latest polling. And one thing they mentioned in that article was like, well, he has cut poverty by half. And I was like, what? I had no idea. That's fantastic. What a, like, I think one of the themes of our show is like the prioritizing people's like material welfare above sort of ideological things, and that's a great number. That's a real accomplishment for the country.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. A good news segment and a quiz at the same time. No, that's really cool. Like, you know, it's hard to keep perspective on things, right? Like if everyone around you is struggling, or even if everyone around you is just really on social media and there's a lot of struggle that's being shown on there, you know, like it's totally very easy to feel like we're not getting anywhere, or like that things are even getting worse. And, you know, there are some areas where it feels like things aren't happening quickly enough, you know, for example, maybe in the climate change response. But to know that, you know, there is significant change that has been accomplished, like we should celebrate that, you know, like
totally. Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, back when I was like really deep in social justice land, it was like almost offensive to point out what had improved, because it was really important that we keep this story about like cis hetero white supremacist patriarchy, you know, grinding everyone to dust. And so that resulted in like either ignoring or downplaying or even being suspicious of anything that's gotten better. And I'm not into that anymore.
Yeah, and it does. I think that it still is important to keep in mind, like you know, trying to listen to that feedback from the top of the episode, that like 7.4% is still lots of people in poverty, and that life's really hard for those people. And so it's not like mission accomplished or anything like that. But at the same time, there's like a whole other 7% that were in poverty 6 or 8 years ago who are not anymore, which is those lives also, those stories also are important, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I like that framing, you know? It's like, I think one really cool thing that it shows is that like policy can make a huge difference in poverty. And so let's see how low we can get it, right? Let's try and get it all the way down.
I do. I'm like, well, I hope they upgrade their goal, right? Because if they're only aiming for 50% reduction, then like, are they going to just do nothing for the next 7 years? Or
they're like, we're good. Again,
Yeah,
right when
we did it.
metrics become targets. Yeah, you're like,
totally.
yeah, well,
Yep, poverty solved.
let's just pause everything. We don't need to do it anymore.
Yeah.
No, I think they'll keep trying. I hope they'll keep trying.
I think so too.
Well, this has been Hot Take Think Tank. Until next time.